All right. Well, thank you for the invitation today. I appreciate those who are on the call. And while we're having a session, feel free to ask questions along the way. Um, as George and Moss said, please use the Q&A section. Put your questions there. I will have a formal Q&A session at the very end. This session is designed to be interactive, so I am not looking to speak the entire time without interruption. I am actually hoping for interruptions. So as I'm going through slides, feel free to ask questions. And at the end, I'll also have my contact information at the bottom as well for you to be able to follow up if you have any additional questions. Because I want to be a resource to all the attendees, even beyond this session that we're having today. So that being said, to be mindful of time, let's go ahead and get started. All right. So again, this is Closing the Digital Divide. My name is Professor Elgrie J. Hurd III. I am a professor here at Dallas College. I teach all the psychology classes, and I also teach sociology courses here within the district. I am primarily campus at the Brookhaven campus, which is in the northern part of Dallas County. I am also an industrial organizational psychologist, which George and Moss mentioned. And the short version of that means I work with organizations, big and small, to help them figure out what they do well, what they need to improve on. So those are some of the things that I help and assist through. And today we'll be looking at this digital divide as it relates to the pandemic. So we'll kind of explore some different things. So one thing when I like to do when I get started is kind of break down some things we're going to explore a little bit more formally. So we're going to look at some strategies for educators to communicate with students efficiently. Communication and communication barriers have been a huge challenge for everyone involved in the education process, whether you're a student, whether you are the educator, whether you are a parent or guardian, whether you're an administrator, whether you're a community member who wants to support. Communication is important and has been a challenge in different ways. We're also going to be asking, hopefully creating opportunities for you to identify 2 or 3 ways for advocating for best practices during this shelter in place. Although we got people who are able to get vaccinated throughout the country, for the most part, we're still a shelter in place. Everyone's not out and about, and so we want to create those opportunities for you all. And the last one is to be able to apply strategies for teaching and learning in a virtual education environment. This whole section is about empowering all the parties involved, the students, the educator, and whoever the support systems are for the educator and the student. So the goal is to be an empowering session to give you some best practices so that everyone who's getting something has something that they can apply later, not just something they can put on someone else to help fix a problem. All right, before we get started, an important disclaimer. My goal is to cover some things. Depending on your interpretation of the title, you might think I'm going to cover everything, and realistically, with an hour, there's not enough time to cover everything. George and Mouse mentioned about Dallas College's commitment to accessibility for all students. And that being said, there are some things that I'm not going to go in deep dive in as relates to ADA accommodations. Not that they aren't important, just that if we want to do it well, requires a separate session. I have had experience in being an ADA coordinator, American Disabilities Act coordinator in various institutions. And so if that's something that you're passionate about, or that you are a student, or that you have a student and you want to support them more, feel free to touch base with me at the end of the session. Make sure you get my contact information so I can follow up with you. And again, we can't cover everything. I just want to stress this because I want to be clear so that if you go, oh, we didn't cover this. Well, I can't cover everything. So I want to put that disclaimer out there at the very beginning so that we're all on the same page. So why am I here? I'm here for a bunch of different reasons. One is I'm a parent. So I have 4 children, all in grades pre-K through 8. And so I have seen firsthand some of the challenges in digital divides and some assumptions I had that I thought my children would be able to navigate, and they weren't able to without some assistance. And that was really insightful. I'm here because I'm an educator, because I have learned some things that I thought my students had access to or knowledge about that they really didn't. And that was insightful because I had to check myself on assuming what my students had to be successful. And so I want to share the best practices that work for me with other educators so that they can hopefully find some things that they can use for themselves. And with that, I've also had the privilege of being a homeschool parent, being that for the first 6 years of my kids, they were homeschooled. And so that has actually helped us a lot during this transition to virtual learning, and using some best practices that we did to try to individualize each of our students that we had in our own home to make things happen. So those are the things that the reasons why I'm here. Now, in the chat box, I'd be curious for you to put, why are you here today? If you're here because it's an assignment, that's fine. If you're here because you're an educator and you want to learn more, that's great as well. If you're from the community, why are you here? I would like if you all to put in the chat as to why you're there. And if either Georgia Moss or Laura De La Cruz Lewis can read out some of those responses, that would be great.
So, curiosity.
Okay. Curiosity. All right. Well, hopefully we'll be able to address some of your curiosity.
To learn more, class assignment, to become a better virtual learner.
Okay. I hear that, class assignment. I'll try to make it worth your while for those. This is the class assignment. To be a better virtual learner, that's great. I am big about accountability. If I can learn something new, okay.
I'm interested in, see, it's going real fast. I'm interested in hearing as many perspectives as possible on how to help our students.
Okay.
I'm here because
awesome.
I like to learn something new. If I can learn something more to support students better, it's a win-win. Learn how to reach my students.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, those are all great reasons. And if you have more reasons, you're feeling a little typing shy, that's okay. We'll get to you eventually. One of the things that for this session to work is, for it to work well, is I need the feedback of the audience members. So this is not designed to be a lecture. This is designed to be a conversation piece where I share some ideas and then get feedback from you all. So thank you all who shared thus far. I really do appreciate it. So if I can just kind of share with you what the pandemic has taught us. It's taught different things. And I'll speak what I have learned and what it's taught me. It's taught me that empathy is really important. Now, whether you're familiar with empathy or not, I just kind of want to go over a definition of empathy so that we're all on the same page as relates to the words that I'm using. Empathy is the idea of being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to be able to not necessarily agree with where they're coming from, but to have a better understanding as to what their experience is. Those of us who are on this call who are parents, empathy is something that you need if you really want to be able to connect with your child, is ways to understanding what they're going through. Because my take on a situation versus my child's take on a situation aren't the same things. And so it requires empathy, that willingness to not use my perspective to understand someone else, but to use someone else's perspective to understand them. And that's what a lot of people are lacking, that sense of empathy, with taking it out of your perspective and looking at it in someone else's perspective and what that means. So what I'd like you to do, it's a question in the chat that I have for you to put in the chat box, is when you hear the phrase empathy is not an endorsement, what does that mean to you? Empathy is not an endorsement. So what I'd like you to do is to respond to that in the chat. What does that mean to you? Empathy is not an endorsement.
I think they're thinking. We don't have any answers yet.
That's okay. That means they're taking their time. I like that.
we have one now. It's about, it's not agreeing with their feeling. It's about acknowledgement. It means empathy is voluntary. Empathy doesn't necessarily mean we agree 100% with the other person, just that we're willing to listen to their perspective.
Awesome.
Means I understand your situation and perspective, but it does not mean I agree. Because I may feel compassion for your perspective, it does not mean I agree with your conclusion. And not condoning or enabling the issue or situation, but having compassion.
Okay. Awesome. Those are great answers. Thank you for those. I appreciate you all taking the time to kind of think through before responding right away. To me, that I appreciate you being invested in this conversation. So those are all great examples. And since I'm in Texas, I always like to use a football example because I've learned the hard way that football is a pretty big deal here in Texas, especially North Texas. So I don't watch a lot of football, but I have a lot of friends who do watch football. So when their team loses or wins, at the end of the day, while I don't lose any sleep either way, I recognize that that's something that's important to them. That is an important aspect of what makes their sports experience relevant. I can appreciate that without having to be a fan of their favorite team. I can appreciate that without having to cheer with them. And so what's important when we talk about this pandemic and the digital divide is the challenge is just because you're okay doesn't mean someone else is. And so I really want to push with that. So the digital divide is kind of real. And what I mean by that, by it's real, is that everyone doesn't have access to high-speed internet. This includes educators, staff. Some people, they don't have that access at home. They had it at work. And so when everyone was virtual and they weren't at work, for some people that was tough. For some people that still is tough. Everyone still doesn't have high-speed internet access. So there's that component. Everyone doesn't have a computer or a laptop or a Chromebook or a MacBook. That's not everyone's reality. In my household, we had to actually purchase more devices. We didn't have enough devices for our kids to be able to do school and for us as the adults to be able to do work. It just wasn't happening. We have the privilege to buy additional devices. That's not everyone else's privilege. Some of my children's classmates were sharing a computer among 3 other students in their household. That makes it tough. And the parent who also needs the computer for work. So understand that just because it's true for you doesn't mean it's true for everyone else. People are trying to complete assignments via cell phone. The pandemic started in the United States in March of 2020. In March of 2021, April of 2021, unfortunately, I'm learning that I still have students who are trying to do their work via cell phone. And we're trying to connect them with resources on campus and in their local area that can help them with that. That's still a reality for students even in 2021. So keep that in mind. How the pandemic is going to affect people is going to vary from person to person. Some students will choose between work and school. Some of our students that are in Dallas College that I serve, those are the juggling acts they have to deal with. I like to complete your work, but I got to make sure these bills get paid. Those are real realities. Some students have to choose between being a babysitter and an unofficial parent versus doing their work. I got to get my work done, but I got to make sure these little people in the household that they're taken care of, and I can get back to my work eventually, hopefully, maybe. Everyone's stressed. And stress looks differently for different people, but everyone has their own different type of stress. And so empathy is important right now. So if you get nothing else from this session, hopefully you get the importance of empathy when it relates to all the stuff going on in the learning environment. Okay, so let's keep on trucking. It's always fun when the tech doesn't want to act right. Ah, there we go. Now, many people are familiar with the term KISS, and it probably has different connotations. For the context of this conversation, KISS does not stand for Keep It Simple Stupid. I do my best to try to not have acronyms that are related to a negative. So my acronym for KISS is Keep It Simple Scholar. Whether you are the educator, whether you are the student, whether you're a support system, you all are scholars. When I interact with my students on discussion boards, I typically often will say, greetings, fellow scholar, because that's what I expect of my students. So on the educator side, what you can do is you can be consistent. What I mean by that is trying to communicate with your students the same time, the same day and same time of the week. Now you're not always going to do that, so people giving you some little wiggle room is important. For me, my announcements to my students happen on Mondays. That's when they're getting information sent from me to them. The other thing is to have a consistent time when students are able to reach you. I have office hours. Those are times students can reach me. I also have additional times where I can be made available as well. And so those things are really important. So those are the kind of things that being consistent can help you with. Another opportunity is having multiple ways of communication. Now, how you define multiple ways is kind of up to you. For me, that's email and phone. For other people, it might be other ways. But ideally, having more than one way, because email, while it seems really commonplace for educators, because we have to use it on an everyday basis typically, um, email isn't necessarily something that all students are familiar with. Especially as you get into the younger grades in the K-12 system, email is a very foreign concept. Last part is less is more. And let me ask you all, what do you think I mean by that when I say less is more? So let's see if you can put your response in the chat. What do I mean by when I say less is more as it relates to being an educator?
Don't overwhelm with info, shorter, less frequent emails and posts, not too wordy. Don't overwhelm students with content, don't complicate things. Try to be concise, prioritize, emphasize the most important thing.
Right.
Say what you have to say with all the extra glitter and glam.
You know, my elders when I was a kid was, I used to only don't give too many assignments. Yes, yes. I students tell me that not to give them a lot of assignments. I'm working on that. That one's a little tougher to work through, but I'll get there eventually. The idea is to provide just the meat and potatoes, just the essentials. So that means when I'm sending out emails, I'm not listening to everything you need to know. And the reason that is twofold. One, because I don't want to overwhelm them, as some of you already mentioned. I don't want to stress out the students. The other thing is, I kind of want students to kind of take some ownership of some things. I want to covertly develop some critical thinking skills. If I say, hey, the email is going to give you a little information. The rest of the information that you need is available in Blackboard. Well, that means I'm requiring them to go to Blackboard. I've seen from my children who are in the K through 12 system where teachers will have a little announcement and say everything you need can be found in the assignment section of our Schoology. Less is more. Because again, everyone's stressed, and things that are really logical when people are stressed tend to go out the window if they're overwhelmed. And while it makes sense to go to this place and read through that long email, less is more. Even responding to emails, less is more. let me tell you what you need to know. Here are some essentials. If you have more questions, give me a call. I'm encouraging students to follow up. So less is more on the educator side. If you can do that, like, that's great. Also on the educator side, assume nothing. So in the summer of 2020, I learned a valuable lesson that all my students did not know how to upload assignments into Blackboard. Blackboard is the learning software that Dallas College uses. And so most all of our classes were online during the summer. And I had a student email and say, I don't know how to upload my assignment. And I was dumbfounded. I was like, wow, I didn't think that that would be something I need to cover, because I was assuming a whole lot about what my students had already. And so from that lesson, I provided the video link. Well, I had another student reply back and say, yeah, I don't see how that works for your particular assignment. So then I did a screenshot for that particular student. And so I give those real examples to show that if you want students to do something, it's important to model how they should do it. Excuse me. And not just tell them what to do. You might need to show them how to do those things. You also want to have clear expectations. I am a big fan of using rubrics and deadlines and being very clear about what those are. In my rubrics, it lays out how I'm grading. So there's no smoke and mirrors on how I'm grading. And so that way we're all on the same page. The last part is being flexible with accessing to content. And historically, when I used to only make assignments only available in this short window, but I realized that for some people, with this pandemic we're in, with things changing and work environments changing, I need to be a little more flexible. So I started opening up assignments at the beginning of the semester. Now, depending on what grade you're teaching, that may not be the ideal where you're opening up everything at once, but giving people a longer window to submit things. If it's a discussion board, giving them 2 weeks to go ahead and post instead of 1 week. I'm not changing the deadline, but just changing the opportunity window on when they can get things done. For students have a voice. It's important to learn how to exercise it. And so with that, I want to ask in the chat, why do you think students need to learn how to advocate for themselves? So if you want to put your answers in the chat like you've been doing, I would greatly appreciate it. And what I mean by advocate for yourself, meaning to be able to speak up for yourself.
Helps them build self-confidence.
Okay.
Shows you're putting in effort.
Okay.
So we can know where they are in their understanding. Being able to self-advocate will serve them well as they go about the work world.
Absolutely. So one of the challenges that I have sometimes is when students know that I teach their psychology classes, I think there's this misconception that I'm some type of superhero with superpowers and that I can read their minds. I'm not able to do that. And so I don't know what a student has going on if a student doesn't tell me. And in this virtual world where I don't get to see students face to face, where I don't get a chance to engage with them after class, outside the classroom, I'm depending on the student to let me know what's going on, because if they don't, there's nothing I can do. Now, I can say I'm available. I can provide my phone number as a place to contact me. But if they don't utilize it, I don't know. I don't know if a student has lost a loved one. I don't know if a student is trying to juggle things. I don't know all your details. I just need to know if you need help from me, what you need from me. And the benefits, as someone said earlier, that advocating for yourself is bigger than the classroom. It allows you to, when you're dealing with teamwork outside the classroom or even inside the classroom, to say what you need from your teammates. what you need from maybe the instructor. In the workplace, whether you're interviewing or whether you're running a team, you can kind of advocate, like, this is what I need from you. This is what I need from you so I can do my job. So it's really important because the biggest fan of you as it relates to you being a student should be you. And if that's not the case, then now's the time to start developing that muscle so that you can get there. I want to encourage students who are listening today to know resources that are available to you. Know what's there for you. If you're going to Dallas College, there are resources to help with bills, with food, with having access to devices like laptops, internet connection. Those things are available. Perhaps maybe you're just dealing with a crisis and you're just stressed out. There are counseling services available. And so it's important to, if you're not sure what they are, to ask the question. Another important concept is to be proactive. And this goes hand in hand with the idea of knowing how to advocate for yourself. To be proactive, there's not much I can do that will be helpful if you tell me after the fact. So what's important is if you know that you're struggling to get something in on time, let your instructor know before the deadline comes. That's really helpful. As an instructor, we're encouraged to have empathy for our students. For my students, I think it's also important for them to have empathy for their instructors or whoever college or school staff that they're interacting with, because we're humans too. And so we want to help and support you. We also want you to be mindful of our time and making sure it's going both ways. So being proactive is a great way to do that. Now, for those of you who are parents who have, I have K-12 on here, but it will also include pre-K kids all the way to 12th grade. For those of you who are involved parents post high school, sometimes students are going to need additional support beyond themselves advocating. And so in that regard, I would encourage people to ask for rubrics. And what I mean by that is sometimes I've had assignments where my child has been given an assignment and we're not sure where to be, how they're going to grade. I don't want my kids staying up to the wee hours working in the wrong direction and the assignment gets graded a totally different direction that he went. And so I think it's important that you encourage, if you are K-12, making sure that you are the parent or guardian, that you're asking teachers, hey, can we get the rubric so we know how to support our student in completing your task? You're not asking them for a cheat sheet because ideally they're going to have to grade it anyway. So let's make sure that we're not wasting the student's time and that the student's not wasting their time in the grading process. Encourage them to track the progress of the student, because sometimes during this virtual learning, little milestones go a long ways. I know for one of my students that lives in my house, we were struggling getting one assignment done at a time. It was just feeling so overwhelming being in a virtual world, and that was tough. Encouraging breaks consistently. I am not a fan of long classes. And when I do teach long classes, there are breaks involved. And so when it comes to studying, when it comes to doing schoolwork, encourage them to take breaks. Today, for example, my students that live in my house are doing virtual learning. And so we are encouraging them after every 40, 45 minutes or so to take a break, to unplug from the technology, to go outside, go get something to munch on, take a quick nap, but encourage those breaks consistently. We are spending way more time in front of a screen than we probably ever have before prior to this pandemic. And so it's important to kind of disconnect, take away from technology altogether if you can, and take some breaks. And for those of you who are allies of your student, offer feedback. The caveat to offering feedback is to offer feedback in a kind way. To offer feedback in a way that's it's not to shame the instructor, but this was kind of confusing. When you said this, is this what you meant? We were struggling with this aspect of it. Or if something's working well, that feedback is great too, because educators don't know everything. And so it's helpful to get that feedback. Ideally, you get in the bounds, but that's not necessarily always going to be the case. But offering feedback, offering what the instructor is doing well. That way they can keep supporting your student in a great way. And things need to be improved on, giving that feedback so that that instructor can improve how they're supporting the student. For me, education is a combination of the student working with the educator and the whoever support system, all three of those working together. When that happens, a lot of great things can happen. So those are things that I want to stress to you all. All right. Any questions about those things I've gone through, about the allies, or even about on the student side of being an advocate? Okay. All right. So at this point is the next part where I need your input. Based on what I've shared with you thus far, what are your takeaways? What's something that you learned? Because some of you said you were coming here to learn something. Some of you said you were curious. So what are some things you've learned from this session? Empathy is key when dealing with students.
Yep. Empathy is key when dealing with students.
Absolutely.
I've learned to have more confidence in myself.
Right.
Be simple in delivery of information. Empathy is needed by all of us. Encourage feedback from students. I've learned that breaks are necessary in order to function properly. Be an engaging and active participant as a student. That while distance learning may be a challenge, students and support staff must operate in the spirit of excellence. They must still operate in the spirit of excellence. Assume nothing and be kind. Don't assume students' lives are like ours. Consider extending opportunities to hand-in work. Value the importance in student self-development through instruction. Don't make assumptions.
Absolutely. Those are all great takeaways. And if those are takeaways that you have, I'm encouraged that you will use that not only for yourself, but share that with someone else. I think it's really important that in this digital divide, there's a couple of things that we have to understand. Simply having a smartphone or a laptop doesn't mean you know how to use it in ways that will help you in the educational setting. Simply having internet doesn't necessarily mean that it's fast enough. Simply because someone has been a student doesn't mean that they understand the plight of the students that they're dealing with as the instructor or a staff person or an administrator. So if those are your takeaways, that's really encouraging. And I appreciate what you all have shared. So we go from that to our formal section of Q&A. This is a chance for you to ask anything that I didn't answer or clarification on things that I already brought up. And so I can offer you some more detailed information. So at this point, the floor belongs to the participants.
Some of the questions that were entered into the Q&A were more commentary to some of the feedback that you asked for earlier in the session, but one of them talks about it's difficult to speak up with someone in authority while in a student role. Are there ways to support them in doing that as a faculty member or as a staff member, maybe?
Absolutely. So I will use a personal example. I have learned that there's always room for improvement on the instructor side. So I noticed this semester I had some students that were struggling. So I put out a survey, a Google Forms, and had them fill it out and ask them, what are some things that I can do as the instructor? And one of the things they said was, I'm just not sure how to reach out to you. Now, office hours are a great tool if people know what they're used for. So I recognize that it was on me to explicitly say, my office hours are to help you if you're struggling with assignments, help you if you're behind and you want some suggestions on how to move forward, to let you to talk one-on-one about resources that are available to you. So in the question of the person asking how can faculty and staff support more, I think one way we can help is by intentionally giving examples of ways for you to utilize us, meaning the employees, to help you as the student. Because sometimes you're not sure how to ask us. So sometimes offering those things is a way to do that and let them know that, hey, if you don't have all the answers, I don't need you to, but let's start a conversation. And that's a good starting point.
I love that. Thank you. We also had a question, or not a question, early in the chat when you asked what were people here to learn. And we have one question. My desire is to learn more from your perspective of the digital divide and how it is different from before the pandemic. So what's different about the digital divide between before and after the pandemic?
Well, I'll speak particularly to Dallas County. Dallas County is one of the metropolitan areas that actually has one of the larger digital divides among the metropolitan areas throughout the country. So people were already having limited access to the tech they need to be successful prior to the pandemic. But now we're having people having to juggle between surviving and thriving. So a difference for a lot of people is some people aren't working anymore. It was one thing to have tech issues but be able to work and other things, but now you have people who are struggling to be able to eat, struggling to be able to put gas in their car. So you have those challenges. The winter storm that we had in February was a reminder of the gap that exists. You had people who were using their cars to keep warm in the garage, which leads to carbon monoxide poisoning. But when people don't know what they don't know, they can put themselves and other people in harm's way. And so what you're finding is that students who are trying to learn right now may not be aware of the tech resources that are available on campus or through their computers, through the internet, that they should be utilizing. And so that means that we as staff members, whether you're a faculty, whether you're a staff, whether you're an administrator, is that we have to be intentional about sharing the things that are out there and reminding people about things that are out there. And yes, it's extra work. Reality is the only way that we're going to successfully get out of this pandemic and recover is we have to be willing to go outside our comfort zone for other people. We have to be willing to take the time to go above and beyond, because going above and beyond is the requirement for us to get better.
Thank you. Lori, Andy, do we have any other questions in the Q&A?
One just came in. What can students that are falling behind do to relay to a teacher that they need more help rather than just more time on assignments?
Great question, because I've gotten those kind of emails. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that faculty aren't mind readers. And so I think it's important for two things to happen, that accountability has to go two ways. The student shouldn't look for the instructor to fix everything. Like, I'm behind, help me so I can pass. Okay, I feel that. I know you want to pass. I think it's important that if they really want to get the help they need, to be willing to engage with the instructor beyond an email. Now, If the instructor is not willing to engage behind the email, that's a different conversation. But if an instructor is willing to talk with you, I think that's going to be easier than doing email exchange because it's easy to get things lost in translation. Each student's going to have different things with different needs. And sometimes having a conversation, we can get a way more accomplished in a 10-minute conversation than 5 to 15 emails. And so by talking and being more specific and talking through things, we can figure out, hey, this is what you're struggling with. Some of the challenges I see with students is they're behind and they're trying to make up for all the stuff they're behind in, and then neglect the things that they have a chance to do on time. And so, sometimes it's about students communicating that, and also it's on the faculty to say, hey, listen, I can help you. It may not mean that you'll get the A. And sometimes I know getting an A is a goal. Sometimes it's not always going to get the A. Sometimes passing is more important than that A because it's more realistic in what you got going on. A C or a B is not going to make or break you. I had some C's in my life, and my life did not come to an end. It did suck. I didn't like it. It didn't come to an end. And I think as it relates to grades, people are more flexible. There are things like incompletes. But again, unless a student's willing to share what's going on, an instructor can't figure out what's best. I had a student who was being stalked and their life was threatened. That student needed to take an incomplete. That student was totally unaware that incomplete was even an option. And the only reason that conversation even came up was because that student was willing to give me a little bit more information to work with so we could figure out their individualized solution.
Thank you, Elgrie. I want to kind of combine these next two questions because I think they're kind of, they work well together. What solutions do you offer for students not having sufficient technology to participate fully in virtual classes? And how do you engage with students who are using their cell phones? So it's kind of that whole, how do we engage?
Okay, so how do I engage with students? I engage with students on my cell phone. Students have my cell phone number. And now for those who are on this call, who are educators who are like, I will never give a student my cell phone. You do what works for you. I do have parameters on what hours they can contact me, but I recognize that sometimes texting a student is a good way to build conversation than to email, do email exchanges. Even though for me, I feel like they're very much similar, but I recognize a lot of students are comfortable texting. As it relates to when students don't have tech issues, then our tech needs, then for me, it's connecting them with, for example, if they're at Dallas College, connecting them with student services and putting them in touch with what's available. The other is also making sure they're aware of what's around locally. I have the experience of working in student services prior to working as a full-time faculty member, so I'm familiar with certain things that are in the local community, such as the public libraries having laptops and internet hubs that you can utilize, that you can check out. And so making them aware of those things. But again, that only happens when the student gives me a little bit more specifics about what their needs are. As it relates to communication, I communicate students via text because sometimes that's just how it is. I try to meet students where they are to get them where they need to get to. I would love for all students to email me as their form of communication. I recognize some students are intimidated by the idea of email. I'm not formal enough. I didn't use the right greeting. So texting is a way for me to ease students into being able to communicate with me.
Wonderful. I have another question here. What is some advice on contacting difficult professors?
Ooh, difficult professors. So in the spirit of advocating for yourself as a student, if you're reaching out to an instructor and they don't reply back, one, you want to reach out via email, and this is more so of a paper trail. Reach out to the instructor. I would give them about 48 hours to respond. I know some instructors will respond back in less than that, but give them about 48 hours to respond. Send a second email. And if they're still not responding, then at that point, then you may want to reach out to a supervisor. I am not a fan of, if you have an issue, immediately go above the instructor, because at the end of the day, the person above is going to ask for the instructor and student to try to work it out. So I think it's important to try to reach out via email formally, and then send a follow-up email. I think after 2 emails, I think it's fair to say if they're not responding to anything whatsoever, and it's not the weekend, let me qualify that, and it's not a holiday, and it's not a winter storm that has shut down power through most of Texas. Outside of those, then at that point, you may want to that student may want to talk to their advisor and let them know what's going on, and so the student and the advisor can kind of partner and figure out how you can communicate with the instructor. Because ideally, most instructors will respond back. I do recognize there are some difficult instructors, whether you're talking about the K-12 system or even in the college setting. But you want to do your due diligence so that you can say, I tried once. Okay, hey, maybe the email got lost. I tried twice. And so at this point, I need help because we need to move forward.
Thank you. We have another one. How do we maintain standards while allowing flexibility? I want to have some firm deadlines to teach time management and accountability, but it seems like many students need what they need right now is more flexibility rather than a fixed deadline provides.
Good question. I'll give you my take, and you can kind of make it into your own and personalize it. I don't think you have to lower expectations. I do think it's important to make sure what those expectations are up front. And I recognize that sometimes, even though you make them up front, students don't read them. And so sometimes you may have to remind them of what those expectations are. I have a policy, for example, for late work. There's a policy. You have to let me know before the assignment is due that you want to submit something in late. If you do not, I am not going to take it. Some students don't like that, and I get that, and they have every right to feel that way. But I need them to understand that by extending certain time periods, I'm also throwing off other student stuff as well. So it's not simply just about them. And so sometimes, and I communicate that to students, and that still may not please your students, and that's okay. But I think the fact that you're being transparent, that you're being proactive, and that you are being clear about what your expectations are at the beginning, and that you're consistent about those, those will help. I know students I had that started in January, they were, fussing and complaining a lot. Well, this isn't okay. I don't like this. This is not how I've been taught before. And my response was, thank you for your feedback. This is how I teach this class. This is how it will be taught for the rest of the semester. I'm happy to work with you, try to figure out how I can support you in the parameters that I have set. And I've seen students improve what they're contributing to the class. You're not going to please every student, and that's when it's important for students to understand that, you have to find out how you can work with your instructor. It's not the instructor has to just do whatever. And the same is true for the instructors. You can be flexible and be firm with your deadlines. When I say flexible, I don't mean something to change your deadlines. I just mean that you might want to make it more accessible at an earlier point and possibly give some reminders just because students are overwhelmed. But by all means, when you have standards, I would encourage you to utilize them as best you can and not to go away from them, because I think in the long run, it does more harm than good.
From your experience, what can we as a college do better from the top down, really, to provide students with more tech resources?
It's a heavy question. So from an industrial organizational psychology standpoint, we have to get the data to see what our students' needs are. I think a challenge is we don't necessarily get a lot of feedback from students when we do surveys, so that becomes part of the challenge. And so it means we have to find multiple ways to get information from students. I think we have to be very intentional of asking students what tech they have. And we have to clearly define tech and what that looks like. And we need to do it, unfortunately, we have to do it frequently. We can't just do it in the fall semester and not do it in the spring, because our student dynamics change from semester to semester. And so it requires us to do that. I think we also have to make sure that we've learned during this pandemic that we got to see what tech needs our employees have as well. Because if our employees don't have what they need, then they can't support students. Students don't have what they need, they can't complete the things that Dallas employees are asking them to do. So I think doing constant, collecting data constantly is important. And then also being realistic about who we're serving. What I mean by that is, if the resources are on campus, sometimes we might have to go to areas, distribution places where students can come to, because maybe coming to campus might be difficult. So it requires us being flexible on our end. I've seen it done in other institutions, and I believe Dallas College can do it too. I'm at Dallas College because I believe that community college should be open to anyone who wants to go to college for whatever reason. And so that requires, if that's what we're doing as Dallas College, then we have to be willing to be flexible in not only how we're collecting information, but also how we're distributing resources. And so those are the ways that are starting points, not the end all be all, but those are starting points, collecting the data. And then when we have the data and we have the resources available for students, having multiple ways in which they can have a chance to get it.
And there was one more question that came in. Is technology really progressing if there are still people being left behind in this digital divide?
Technology is definitely progressing. And that's the reason of digital divide, is technology may be progressing, but the access to it isn't necessarily progressing. And that is part of the problem. We can't assume just because, for example, we have solar power, that everyone's going to have access to it. To have solar power in one's home, it's a little pricey. So it's those kind of things. We have access to all these great things for vegetation, but I spent almost my first decade living in Dallas, living in Oak Cliff, where there's not groceries everywhere. There's not libraries everywhere. There's not Wi-Fi hotspots everywhere. So it's not necessarily that the technology is the issue, it's accessibility to the technology that is the problem. It's important for there to be Wi-Fi spots no matter your zip code. It's important to have access to computers regardless of your zip code, regardless of whether you live in a house or an apartment. It's those kind of things that are the issues. It's not that the technology is not there, it's the access to it. And so it is really important for us to make sure that we're not only concerned about those who are speaking the loudest, but also those who aren't speaking at all. Because those are the voiceless people that often get overlooked in the digital divide. And it's not that they're not speaking up, it's just that we're not listening in the right areas. If I live in the city I live in, if the only place that we're listening about how the digital divide is, and people who have their own mortgage, who have good paying jobs, but we're not listening to any other part of the city, then we've missed the mark. And so if we want to have true empathy, that means that we have to listen to the entirety of Dallas County, not just the pockets that have the money or the influence or the loudest.
Wonderful. Thank you. We do have a question. They're asking if they can get your slide presentation. So is that something you'd be willing to share?
Sure, absolutely. Now, Jorge Mas already mentioned that it will be available in a couple of weeks as well. But absolutely be happy to share it. And what I will do is I will share. Let's see.
I tell you what, yeah. I was going to say, if you'll share your email address, and those of you who want his slides, if you will just email Professor Hurd at the address on the screen.
All right. And if you could put in like subject, like digital divide PowerPoint slide, that would just, help me figure out what I need to do. Because I get a lot of emails, so that helps me so that I can be intentional and make sure you get what you need. Um, so I appreciate all the questions that you all have asked. I hope that you got some useful out today. We have about 2 minutes left, so I want to be able to answer any last questions before we get out of here.
Professor Hurd, we have one more question, and I'm afraid it might be a little deep, but we're going to give it a shot.
Okay, I like challenges.
Can you address the reasons why it's so critical to narrow the digital divide gap, and what is the consequence of this inequality?
Awesome. Okay.
Good luck.
The short version of that is the bigger the gaps exist with people, between people, then eventually the entire system pays the consequence of it. When you look at things like wage gaps and things like that, the larger they get, then the more work the system has to do to, instead of empowering people, you're just simply band-aiding issues. So when we don't deal with digital divide, people fall behind and they're not able to, one, be empowered, two, they're not able to contribute to the way that they may want to or that they may be able to. So if we're talking about us being a country and being one nation, like Dallas College is one Dallas College, if we're not looking out for the collective of the students, then eventually it will affect everyone in a negative way.